Good morning, Fountain of Life. Thanks for being with us today. Hey, before we get started on the sermon, just a quick disclaimer. We're recording this on Monday, and just hours ago, Jacob Blake was shot by Kenosha police just down the road from us. And I imagine this is going to be a fairly eventful week with protests and news coming out and developments and hopefully his recovery. And today's passage probably speaks pretty directly to some of what we're experiencing in our community. But we're doing this on Monday, and I know that might shock some of you that we don't live record these things on Sunday morning. And so all of the events of this week, as pertinent as they might be to our passage today, are going to happen after we record this. And so it's not that we're avoiding that, it's not that we're shying away from it, it's that most of it hasn't happened yet. And we're just in the early hours of things. So I just wanted to make that clear so that Sunday doesn't end up sounding tone deaf in the midst of our own state and our own community being the latest to deal with these injustices. All right, so we're going to be taking a look at a chapter in the book of Philippians today. We're going to look at chapter 2 in Philippians. And before we jump into it, I think it's important that we grab hold of a little bit of background and what happened before this letter. So the Philippians is a letter from Paul to the church at Philippi, and he's got a bit of a history with them. And what's cool about it is that we've got that history. If we go back, instead of looking at Philippians, and we look at Acts chapter 16, we see when Paul got to know the people of Philippi. So it was on one of his journeys, and he shows up in a city that is fiercely loyal to the Roman Empire. In some places, it was called Little Rome. When Philippi was populated, the emperor at the time, and this is a little bit before when Paul came there, populated it with retired military and police. And it became a popular place for the military and the police to retire and to live. And so it's very patriotic. It's very nationalist. It is incredibly loyal to the emperor and to the empire, going so far as to this is kind of a center of emperor worship. So Caesar is God. Nobody else is. Nobody else can be. And because of that, it becomes inherently a tough place for anybody who wants to practice a faith that says someone other than Caesar is God. And so it's a tough place to be Jewish. It's going to be a tough place to be a follower of Jesus because neither of those faith traditions are going to be open to the idea that Caesar is God. And so we inherently have a place that is not friendly to the Jewish faith or our Christian faith. So when Paul arrives, there's not much of a Jewish community, and part of the story is how we know that. Paul, when he usually shows up at a city, his normal standard operating procedure, what he's going to do is he's going to go find the synagogue. And he goes there to talk and debate and to get things going, to share Jesus with the Jewish people that are in that city. Well, he gets to Philippi and there is no synagogue, which tells us that there weren't enough Jews that they built any synagogue, or it wasn't allowed. And so when we look at Acts 16, he shows up and he heads down to the river because he figures if there's no synagogue, then any Jews that live here are going to be near water because of the purification and baptism and that kind of stuff. And so he heads down the river, and who he meets down there is a group of Jewish women. And one of them was Lydia, and she's the only one that's named, but Lydia was a Gentile convert to Judaism, so she wasn't born Jewish. She came to know God and become Jewish, even though she was born a Gentile. And Paul shares with this group, and Lydia really likes what she hears, and her heart is moved, and her and her household are baptized. Paul is invited to come and stay with them, and we kind of have Lydia as the first member and really the leader of the Christian church at Philippi. And Paul and Silas stick around for a little while. They're not just going to roll in and get a conversion and then leave. So they stay for a while, and each day they're heading to the place of prayer, and they have these encounters with this young slave girl who was like a fortune teller. She was able to tell the future, and they kept running into her, and she kept kind of revealing who Paul and his companions were. And it literally says that Paul got annoyed enough that he turned around and cast the demon out of her. This happened day after day, and then finally he gets annoyed enough that he cast it. Well, her slave owners now don't have their moneymaker. They're not able to sell her services as a fortune teller, as a predictor of the future. And so they drag Paul and Silas in front of the authorities. They are beaten, they are thrown in jail, essentially for saying that someone other than Caesar is God. And Paul and Silas are sitting in jail, and it's about midnight, and they're singing hymns, right? That's not your normal picture of jail, right? That at midnight we'd be singing hymns and praying, but that's what Paul and Silas are doing. There's an earthquake, the doors of the place blow off, the shackles fall off all the prisoners that are inside, and the jailer wakes up from this earthquake and sees that the doors are all open and knows that this is going to be really bad for me, and so pulls out his sword and is about ready to kill himself to avoid the punishment and whatever else was coming his way for letting all of these prisoners out. And Paul yells from inside, "Whoa, whoa, 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 don't hurt yourself. We're all here. We're good." And the jailer, gets some candles in there, lights the place up, and sees that everybody is still there, and is so moved by this that he takes Paul and Silas home, mends their wounds, feeds them. Paul, of course, tells them about Jesus. The jailer and his whole household are baptized, become believers, and that's kind of our beginning of the church at Philippi. There's Lydia and her group, and then the jailer and his family. And Paul stays for a while longer to encourage them and kind of get their sort of new faith up to a place, and then heads out. And some years later, he's jailed once again in Rome, and he's in some big trouble now. And the church at Philippi takes up a collection, and they send this collection of money and gifts to Rome with one of their members as an encouragement and as a way to let Paul know they're thinking of him, and to provide him some of the things that he needs while he's there. And the letter that is the book of Philippians is Paul's response. So it's obviously heavy on thank you. It's obviously he's very grateful. He's very affectionate. Talks about how much he misses them, how he longs to come back, and then it also has some encouragement, some instructions, because the guy who delivered the gift also shares what's going on back in Philippi, and Paul knows, being kind of pastoral, knows that he needs to provide a little bit of encouragement. So what we have in Philippians is his response to the gift and also to what he has heard about what's going on back in Philippi. So the first chapter of Philippians really starts with a lot of thank yous. But towards the end, he gets down to the end, and he says this. He says, "Conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ." And that sets up this whole next section where he's kind of going to highlight that if you are going to call yourself a follower of Jesus, that means you live in a manner that is worthy of Jesus. That if you're going to claim to be a follower of his, you're going to live in a way that reflects how he lived or what he taught. And he gets to chapter 2, and he gets to this place where he hits them with this series of rhetorical questions. So he says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness or compassion, then make my joy complete. Now, what Paul is essentially saying here is he's saying, if any good has come from following God, if you have experienced any benefit from being a follower of Jesus, then act like it. If any of these things, and they're all obviously what they have experienced and what they have been encouraged, they have been comforted, they have experienced the Spirit. All right, and he's saying, given all of that, act like it. Act like Jesus. All right, and he says, he hits him with some stuff that leads us to believe that there may have been a little bit of conflict in the church here, because he says, make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in the Spirit and of one mind. Right, it's a tough environment. We talked about Philippi. We talked about the fact that it's not going to be an easy place to be a person of faith in Jesus. And that kind of stress, that kind of pressure, that kind of resistance and lack of acceptance can have an effect on you and can lead you, even inside the church, to a place where you're disagreeing more than you'd like. And so Paul speaks to this and kind of says, hey, let's remember that we're in this together, and you all share the same God. And so pull it together and stick together in the midst of this. And then he really comes in on it. And he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. And we get right to the crux of things for me today with this couple of sentences, right? Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. So what's selfish ambition and vain conceit? Selfish ambition is, I'm going to get mine. I'm going to get what's coming to me. I am going to grab it and take it and what I'm going to get every bit that I can. And vain conceit is sort of, hey guys, look at me, right? It's I am going to get attention. I am going to get people to praise me. I'm going to make decisions that get me prestige or favor or make me look good, okay? And Paul's rolling in here and saying, you don't want to be doing any of that. Instead, what we want to be doing is looking out for other people's needs rather than your own, okay? Value others above yourselves. And look out for their interests instead of your own interests. But it's interesting that what he says is not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. So it's not that he's asking one person to do this. He's asking them all to do it and all to be looking out for each other so that your needs are taken care of. Your interests are looked out for because other people are looking out for them. You don't have to. And that's the beauty of this, is there's a communal nature to it. There's a we look out for each other so that we don't have to grab hold and selfishly take. We can, in the process of looking out for everybody's needs are met. Now, what's interesting about kind of life for us right now is that I feel like in one of the most clearest examples of following this command or instruction or suggestion, however you want to look at it, that I have ever seen in my entire life is our current relationship with masks in the midst of this pandemic. Right? If I'm looking out for my interests, I'm not wearing this. Okay? This is uncomfortable. This is inconvenient. This hampers communication. About the only thing that this does good for me is it hides half of my face. So I'm only half as unattractive as normal. And so that's the one benefit of this for me. Why do we wear these things? Right? We wear these to look out for the interests of other people. We wear these to protect the health and well-being of the people around us, not ourselves. Okay? A cloth mask is not protecting me. A cloth mask is protecting you. And so I don't understand Christians who, in the name of their faith, refuse to wear these. I don't understand that. It feels like the clearest and most obvious example of looking out for the interests of others. I will be uncomfortable. I will be inconvenienced so that other people don't get sick. Same around here. Like, this place is empty. We're not meeting in person. I think all of us would rather have live worship. I think all of us would rather be here together and be able to have the face-to-face interaction. But right, a significant portion of our congregation fits squarely in the demographics that are being ravaged by this virus. And so, in the interest of looking out for each other, we continue to meet virtually. Now we're doing monthly First Sunday services, but we're staying safe. We're staying in our cars. We're maintaining our distance. But, could we be back together in person for Bible study on Wednesday nights or Sunday school Sunday mornings, or even figure out a way to do it here on Sundays for worship? Probably. But that would be selfish ambition and vain conceit. That wouldn't be looking out for each other. That wouldn't be looking out for the potentially vulnerable among us. And God's call to us as his people is to not be selfish, not go after our interests, but instead look for others. Paul even throws out a great example. Well, the ultimate example. He then goes on, in your relationship with each other, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Even Jesus knew that it was a better idea to look out for other people's interests than his own. And he had all of the advantages. He had everything that he needed to essentially take control, and he gives it up because he's looking to the interest of others. What we've got to realize is that when God throws things like this at us, instructions, commands, suggestions, when God invites us to do these things, It's not because he's trying to control us. It's not because he's trying to create a bunch of obedient robots. It's not that he needs our obedience, because he doesn't. He invites us to do this because it's the best life possible to live. He knows that a community that are all looking out for each other's needs instead of grabbing hold of their own is a way better place to live than the alternative. And you go down the line, go back to the 10 Commandments. Every single one of them is there because it's better, life's better when you live according to those versus the alternative. Same thing here. Life is better when we're looking out for each other than feeling like we have to grab and hold on to ourselves. What you've got to start asking yourself is, what if our entire church started living like this? What if all of us here at Fountain of Life were able to really look out for the interests of each other and not be motivated by grabbing and getting what we can and being praised and being noticed, and instead look to take care of each other? What would that look like? What if an entire community? What if a police department started acting like this? What would it look like if everyone in just our country who claimed to be a follower of Jesus followed his example and treated each other this way? It'd be a pretty different world. I think, right, we go back to Acts 16, and we've got a great example. I think there's somebody listening to this letter, right? The letter probably arrived, Philippians shows up, and the church gets together and says, hey, we got a letter from Paul, and everybody sits around, and one person stands up and reads it. And there's going to be one person in that audience that is going to remember someone doing exactly this for him. Remember the jailer we talked about? Right? Paul and Silas are sitting in jail. They've been unjustly imprisoned. They've been beaten. They've done nothing illegal. There's suddenly an earthquake. The doors blow open. The chains fall off of them. What do you do when that happens? Right? No, but none of us would have blamed them one bit if they had walked out. Right? You sort of feel like it. Oh, God's setting us free. We can grab hold of our freedom and walk out of here. They didn't go anywhere. They looked outside. They saw the jailer, saw that he was distraught, saw that he was about to stick his sword through himself, and looked out for his interests and said, hey, we're still here. Don't hurt yourself. Don't worry. We're not going anywhere. As a result, that jailer becomes a follower of Jesus. If everybody who claimed to be a Christian made choices like that and lived our lives in a way that looked out for others' interests instead of our own, how attractive would that be? How many people would come to know Jesus because of our actions? I think it'd be a few. I think we'd have a few more jailers around. But we don't do it. Why? If it's such a great thing, if that's the best possible life for us to live, if we've got no reason to distrust that God's going to take care of us, why do we grab hold of what we can get? Why do we seek after approval and praise on our own and not spend our energy on other people? Because I think somewhere in there it requires trust. It requires faith. It requires vulnerability. Because if we're not going to look out for our needs and our interests, then we've got to rely on God to look out for them for us. And that is a challenge. That's going to be difficult. And so we take things into our own hands. We we grab hold of a cheap substitute for the real thing. Paul is standing here and offering the real thing and saying, look, the best possible way to live, the way Jesus lived, is to look after others' interests and trust that God will take care of you. And I get it, that's hard, but it is the best way. Read verses 9, 10, and 11 and see how it worked out for Jesus. I think Paul throws that in there to say, God can do a much better job of keeping your interests in mind and taking care of you than you can. I mean, think about that. Who can really meet your needs and guarantee your interests? Who can do it better? Can I? Or can God with his limitless resources? Right? We've got a choice. We've got the real good life, or we've got the cheap substitute that is selfish ambition and vain conceit. I'm a weird transition, stick with me. I'm a bread guy, right? I really like baked products with flour of all kinds. You name it, right? I mean, whether it's a sandwich roll or a hamburger bun or French bread with my spaghetti or any of the breakfast breads, donuts, muffins, English muffins, toast, biscuits, right? And nothing better than spreading butter on a hot biscuit. That is the best way, right? That's the life Paul's calling us to, is butter on a hot biscuit. Okay, but we go after the cheap substitute. Margarine is a cheap substitute for butter. Okay, yes, it's cheaper, and I get it. Some of us, all of us, at some point in time are at a place where we're just not going to get butter because margarine's cheaper, and that's where we're at economically at this point in time. I totally get that. But even when I've been in that place, I've known as I spread margarine on my warm bread product that it's not as good as the real thing. Margarine's a petroleum product, people. I mean, that means for all we know, a guy who was cleaning out a tank at an oil refinery got a little bit on his finger, tasted it and thought, if I put a little salt and some yellow flavoring in this, I bet it wouldn't be too far off from butter. That guy's a millionaire now because he invented margarine. And we've been settling for a cheap substitute ever since. Putting margarine on a wonderful hot biscuit, to me, it's a lot like another petroleum product. Right? This is a petroleum product, probably invented by the same guy, just doesn't have the salt and the yellow food coloring. And I noticed when I looked at this that they've actually changed their name. It's no longer Vaseline Petroleum Jelly because that doesn't sound very good. Now it's Vaseline Healing Jelly. But make no mistake, this is a petroleum product, just like margarine. And when we live our lives in a way that is taking what we want, what we think we deserve, when we spend our energy trying to get noticed and approaching life with a look at me and me first kind of approach or attitude, right? We might as well be spreading Vaseline on our biscuits because we're settling. We're settling for something way less than the right thing. God stands there with the butter and says, look out for each other. Value others above yourselves. and trust me to take care of you. It's how Jesus lived. It's the best possible life you can imagine. And he's begging us to trust him. And we stand there and we scoop the knife in the Vaseline and we jam the cheap substitute on our biscuit and we settle for this. It's nowhere near as good. It's honestly a little disturbing. And there's definitely a better way. Paul's onto something here. There is a way better way than that. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, looking not to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. That's the invitation. With each other, we look out for each other's interests. And that puts us in a position to trust God to look out for our interests. And both of those relationships are better when we're in that space versus the Vaseline space, versus the cheap substitute space where we take what's ours, or we take what we think is ours, or we do things to get attention and to get praise. We've got to stop settling. God, would you help us follow your example and be more like you? As soon as possible, give us an opportunity today to look out for someone else's interests instead of our own. And we look forward to the ways that you'll change us and change each other because of the choices that we make and the ways that you move when we go after the real thing instead of the cheap substitute. Thanks for this time. Thank you for your word. Thank you for Paul and for his words and that you gave him. Amen. Have a great week, everybody.